Morning, everybody. I need a little more help because I stay up late on Tuesday, so I don't necessarily think it's a good morning, so help me out. Morning, everybody. Morning. All right, there we go. All right. Yeah, that's what, thank you. Thank you. I definitely need that on Wednesday. Hey, I'm glad, really glad to be here, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to come, and even if it is a Wednesday morning, I'm going to keep harping on that. Wednesdays is like grumpy till noon, but I am glad to be here, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to get into 1 John. I haven't necessarily done a lot of studies or speaking out of 1 John, which is my loss. And I really enjoyed getting into this passage in particular and reading through the book as a whole. Chris was on my case to get in titles early on, and I just thought, I think it's about love. I'm just going to love you, love, right? So today, no, I came up with a different title, a little bit of thought, and it's confident integrity, and we'll talk about more of what that means in a little bit. But as we think about what it means to follow Jesus, certainly we know that it is about love, and yet that can feel really, really airy-fairy, or just kind of like, yeah, everybody loves, that's great, let's move on. And what's interesting about 1 John is he just keeps, he kind of does it again and again, and one of the commentators I was looking through was talking about that really instead of, Paul sometimes has more of a direct argument. I mean, he's really building a case for something, whereas this seems to have these themes. It's more like a song that keeps coming back, and then we keep hitting the bridge again, we keep hitting the chorus again, and it's because we need to hear it. And that's why I hope that we can perhaps hear this in a new way. I know it was a good challenge for me that we want to move really beyond. We want to move quickly beyond the things that seem simple, and yet I know the older I get, the more I learn. It's that things sometimes are a lot less complicated, really, than we make them, and it's the things that are simple that we do work really hard to avoid, and especially when it comes to this. As I was reading through again, I kind of from beginning to end, I was really struck anew with how close I think the first century is to our experience today. And I've thought about that a lot over the last couple years, especially as we've seen different cultural shifts and shifts as we understand faith, that in many ways the guide or the help for us, especially as we wonder what does God want for us now, I think it really has our help is from the first century and understanding it's not going to be exactly the same, but there's a lot more dynamics that I think are closer to what we experience, kind of the experience of faith, than maybe we would assume. So take 1 John, and I'm sure you guys have gotten to this to one degree or another, but as I was just reading through, I was thinking about this story that really feels like it kind of matched us, and it's this, that it's a community that had come to know Jesus, and there had been a lot of confident joy in that. They had heard firsthand accounts of people who had said, let me tell you about Jesus, and some of them had touched him, some of them had seen him, some of them had been eyewitnesses to what had happened. And as we've been talking about a little bit at the end, really the message that got hammered again and again in the book of Acts was there was Jesus, you killed him, God raised him and God raised him up, so deal with that, right? That's the message. Jesus, he came from God, you killed him, we killed him, God raised him up, believe in him, trust him. It's that simple of a message, and I think that's what happened certainly for this community that probably was around in the area around Ephesus. They had started with joy, like probably many of us, to the degree that we've been following Jesus throughout our life, whether it's been for a shorter time, longer time, whether we're kind of wrestling with what that actually even means, perhaps anew, that there was at one point a confident joy that Jesus was so good that there was nothing else that mattered really. Everything else paled in comparison. And yet what happens is that initial sort of euphoria for us dies down, right? That things get busy and complicated, and there are really a lot of other options to pursue the kinds of things that we would like, that we talk about within church or within a particular community that gathers around Scripture. There's lots of other options to deal with the sorts of things we talk about with spirituality, experiences of transcendence, lots of other options. And And as we follow Jesus, and that kind of dies down, so that initial excitement, then suddenly we kind of look around, we start wondering, am I following the right one? And for them, the truth is that suddenly it really probably started hitting home that this is weird. I'm following a dead Jewish rabbi that I believe came to life, at least I was told came to life. And honestly, it's weird. And if you talk to people, it's weird. Unless, of course, it's true. And if it's true, then it has profound implications on how we even just view reality. And yet, the truth is that it's weird. I mean, it's the foolishness. Paul will talk about it all the time. Like, it's foolish. It's either foolish or it's scandalous. Either one. And I think sometimes we retroactively, culturally, we think, well, back in the day, they superstitious. They would have believed anything. They wouldn't. This violated what the Jews thought was possible. It violated what the Greeks thought was good or even reasonable. It did not make sense, and it was weird. And life goes on, and suddenly they start looking around, and they start seeing that maybe there are better options than what they have been doing. There are those that are around them that are talking about, let me tell you about the new thing that I've been involved with, the new God to follow, the new temple that's opened up. And if you do this, man, it's awesome. You can seize life for everything that it has. Right here, right now, no limits. And so, yeah, you can do whatever you want. But did he really rise from the dead? And they probably start wondering, is that really true? We didn't actually see it with our own eyes. We kind of trust them, but maybe they didn't quite get it right. And yet I'm looking around, everybody else seems to be having a really good time. I wish I was having that really good time. Like, maybe, he's probably a good teacher, or maybe he was God, but he loves us, yeah, sure, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he really knows or cares really about what's going on, because the important thing is just you do whatever you want to do for you. And this is very much a first century thing. Do what is right for you, right? Pursue what is right for you so that you can have a rich and meaningful life. The experience of faith that they would have had, and that you could read as you go through John, is one that feels fragile. It feels complicated. It feels that like it's full of doubt. It feels in many ways that perhaps they're questioning all kinds of things because it's missing a richness, a goodness, a happiness. It feels fragile. Always wondering, is this true or is there a better option? I feel that a lot of times. I think our college students feel that a lot of times. Is this true or is there really a better option? Because it certainly seems like there is. And then for those of us that might be following and wonder, okay, am I really following God's will? Is he actually pleased with me? Has he actually forgiven me? Is he actually working in my life? Because I'm not really sure. It seems like maybe at times that he's not. That so much of what we hear over and over again is that I want you to know, I want you to know, I want you to know that what the writer is dealing with really is hitting on this sense that there is a lack of confidence. And I think I feel that, I see that in my peers, I see that with students all the time, a lack of confidence, that our experience of faith, as much as we engage with it, often can feel fragile and under attack and always contestable. We're free to believe what we want. It's just really uncertain whether we're believing in the right thing, because there will always be something that will pop up. I think the question for us, I'm hoping, is that we can get towards more of a confidence. And for us to have a confidence on, am I living the right story or not? Because I think that's the big question that we're always asking. Is this the story that is going to be the most meaningful, that is going to help me live the fullest life? We're always asking that to some point. So I want to read the passage. I'm wondering if someone would, who's able to, would be willing to stand up and could read that, and then we'll jump in. So can I have a volunteer to read our passage? Thank you.
For this is the message you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We must not be like Cain, who was from the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not be astonished, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. All who hate a brother or sister are murderers. And you know that murderers do not have eternal life abiding in them. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And by this we will know that we are from the truth and will reassure our hearts before him. Whenever our hearts condemn us, for God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have boldness before God. And we receive from him whatever we ask, because we obey his commandments and do what pleases him.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me if I project? Do I need to use this? I'm going to take this away. I got something for the tape. Thanks. That'll help me be more comfortable. Yeah. And I know you're really concerned about that this morning. Ryan, Chase, and I both have the gift of movement. So I'm going to be with him. Well, what I want to start with before we jump into this, I want to ask, how do we know what is real or what is true? Because that's the question, right? How do I be confident? How do I know what is real or true? And I'm not, let's say, saying in an intellectual sense. I mean in a kind of a real everyday sense of knowing, okay, what's authoritatively real enough to direct how we think about things, what we do, how we spend our energy, our time, our investment. I mean, real enough to know, because at some point we all have to make certain judgments about things, right? Is this better or worse? Is this worth my effort and my time? Is this detrimental? Is this helpful? Is this something that is really good, or is it trivial? Is it something I can ignore, especially in an era now where we have a million options coming at us all the time? How do I know whether what I do matters or whether I'm missing out? Or whether actually what I'm doing is insignificant, and then perhaps raising questions of, am I insignificant in the midst of that? How do we know? And some of your questions that you have later, I help think about that and think about what that would be for your neighbors. What would that be for your friends? How do we know? Because we have to have a way of knowing. We all have a way of knowing whether we have figured that out and are kind of clearly articulated it or not. I want to suggest a couple of sources of authority. That certainly what is immediate or what's right in front of us, that speaks about what's real. What is material, that speaks about, in the material world around us, that speaks about something that's real. What's transcendent and what's spiritual. Let me unpack those a little bit, right? So what's right in front of me, that's kind of reality, and that's the reality I got to deal with, right? So you could tell me something is, you could tell me that something is true, and yet if it violates what I'm seeing right in front of me, I go, well, I'm going to go with this because I have this issue right here, right? So someone's dying in front of you and someone says, hey, they're just fine. You know, it doesn't matter. You're going, no, I see this person right in front of me. I need to do something about it, right? The material world, we're constantly reminded. Since thinking about this, I've been listening to the radio. It's so fascinating to hear how we're constantly hearing about the gene, right, that determines behavior. So one of them grabbed my attention, was really helpful for me because I learned that there's a coffee gene that explains why some people love coffee and can't stop, right? So suddenly, right, it's not my fault. I just drink way too much coffee because I'm genetically prone to it. But we hear that all the time, right? And in many ways, that's good. We hear things all the time about how our brains work and about the different chemicals that can be released. Like, we're learning so much about how we work and how the world works, and that's a good thing. But that's part of what then determines what we go, okay, that's part of what reality is. We also, though, to talk about what it means to be fully human, we have to talk about the transcendent. And I mean, transcendent is just, I'm using a very general term because that's a higher sense of purpose, or a higher being, that there's more than simply just us. And we long for these experiences to know that I can engage or I can connect with something that is much bigger than I. So if you're going to talk about being fully human, you got to talk about, there's some sort of authority that says that there's something more out there for me to engage with. And then there's, I would say, maybe the spiritual or the meaningful. In this case, we're talking about love. So think about this: is on the material side, is love a chemical reaction? Is love about there are certain, for instance, intimacy. We learn chemicals that we have that are released, and that helps us to bond to people. Or is there actual love? Like, what is it? How do those things interact? Like, everyone says that they are about love, but sometimes we don't always necessarily experience love in the material world, right? So I think we have these different, for instance, sources of authority. I'm hoping you'll think about how do these work today, which one dominates, and how do they might perhaps integrate. I'm wondering, as we think about now, okay, going forward, basically as we lead off with our scripture, it is simply this, that we are reminded, necessarily, there's not a new teaching, but he's saying, here's how you know, go back to the beginning, love one another. And for me, I just want to say, it's grown, right? Like, of course. But what does that mean? It's too simple. And so that's where he gets in, and he uses a story. And he uses the story of Cain, which is really fascinating. Before I do that, let me show you one more. What I think a biblical worldview is calling us to is that doesn't deny those realities, but asks us to integrate them. And I think when John is talking about love one another, he's talking about integrating. Now, as he says, okay, here's how you actually begin to move that from just a concept that doesn't touch the material world or reality. He leads us into two stories, or perhaps two different sons. And the first one is Cain. Can I have somebody read this story?
I'll read it.
Okay, thank you.
In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer of the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me."
Isn't it interesting that when he says, love one another, and then he goes in and he says, not like Cain, don't do evil like Cain, that he actually uses as an example. Isn't that interesting? That somehow there's a qualifier. Like, why would he say, love one another, but not like, don't be like Cain? Because in some way, there might be a way in which Cain shows us a way that love, or how we think about engaging with one another, might get actually worked out in real practice. And he would call it evil. But then the question is, so what's actually the evil that's there? Right? Especially if you're connecting it to thinking about love one another. I think the story of Cain is such a fascinating one from the very beginning. If we could maybe perhaps just not put too much distance between us and Cain. Right? If Cain, just like we can't do this with the Pharisees didn't walk around with like green faces and warts all over and huge noses, right? They weren't evil. If anything, they were really well-intentioned, and they were really trying to restore the fortunes of Israel. So we can't go, I would never be a Pharisee like that. We're Pharisees all the time, right? I think we're a lot more like Cain, unfortunately. So let's pull back a little bit like Cain. So what's the deal with Cain? Now, first of all, like, he's dutiful and responsible. Okay, he's religious, right? In the course of time, it was time to bring an offering. Like, this is a guy who's responsible. He knows what's expected out of him, and he brings an offering. And what's fascinating about this, this is in the context of worship, right? The evil that we see working out in the world after the fall is in the context of worship and religious acts, or religious piety, religious activity. Right, we know he has some kind of relationship with God. This isn't a guy that just hates God. I mean, there are interactions. And yet, in what he does in his religious kind of activity, actions, worship, there seems to be something that's missing from God, or missing from his experience with God, that he expected, some sort of pleasure, regard, blessing, or honor. That he was expecting and that he didn't get, and that for him was really, really problematic. What's so interesting, you look at Cain, and it's interesting to see, like, he's engaging with God, but you can just see how annoyed he is, right? Like, he's just kind of ticked at God. Like, God is just sort of a whiner, right? And it's interesting to see how absolutely, like, put out he seems to be. Like, come on. Like, it's just, he's aghast at the sense of how he's being treated. When he says, then God comes to him and he says, well, why are you so angry? I mean, this isn't complicated. Look, this is, Cain, this is not, like, God's not, like, bringing down wrath on Cain right now, right? He's just like, it's like me going to Noah and going, bro, this doesn't have to be hard. Just stop doing that, right? All of us that have kids or no friends with kids, we know that. It's just like I don't hate you. Just stop screaming, please, right? My head's going to explode. This doesn't have to be difficult. Imagine this is, the image that came to mind that perhaps speaks a lot, maybe not well of me, is I think about The Simpsons, and like early, like I just remember an episode of like Homer bringing home like a bowling ball for her birthday, right? And she's just like, thanks, right? Right, this is for your birthday, and so and then there could be this shock of like, what? You don't love this? This is the best birthday present ever I got for you. It's like, yeah, for you, right? Not necessarily for me. I think that's a little bit what's going on with God, is he's saying like, hey, look, this is not about necessarily that you're doing something perfect, but this is about like, this is supposed to be to me, but this seems to have no indication that you care about me or actually what I want. So you talk about, if you were to do what is good, this whole experience could be different. If you, for instance, if you want me to be excited about the birthday present you want to give me, how about you give me something that you know I want? Instead of something I've explicitly said I don't want, right? You're going to get that kind of the Christmas present sort of experience. Yeah, awesome. This is really great. Right? And we're like, oh, you should love it. I made it for hours and hours. Yeah. Is there a gift card? Okay, now I want to think about this. Think about this. So we talked about this sort of example that I think we're called to a holistic faith, one that has integrity, one that brings together these four, I would say, aspects of what's authoritative to be fully human. Okay, notice what's going on then, for instance, with Cain, is I think we're starting to see that stuff is starting to kind of blow. He's starting to blow things apart. That there is, in some ways, this is an interesting problem to fix, and yet what's going on is that there's a sense of a severing between what the transcendent wants and what's going on in the immediate. And for Cain, he's like, here's a little bit of what I have that's right in front of me, and so God should care about it. And you start to see that within the context of worship, there's this severing. That there isn't kind of an integrity between those, but you're seeing that they're cut. And then there's a severing between love and responsibility to others. Right, with this amazing lack of awareness, or perhaps lack of care at the consequences. I mean, that's what's so fascinating about the story with Cain, is that he seems to be just totally indignant that there's any negative ramifications, even when he's really confronted with the death of his brother. It's amazing. Becca was talking about this last night when we were talking out of Romans 12 and did an amazing job. We talked about the Romans 12:9. Let your love be without hypocrisy. Let it not be a game. Let it, right? So often we want to go, well, I think I'm good, and so everything I do is good. And there's this total like severing between sort of the immediate. And I think what happens for Cain, these things don't go away. We still care about these things. We're still going to work out the transcendent and the spiritual and meaningful. And yet his focus becomes on the immediate and what he wants right at that moment, especially for him. So I think maybe it gets us to a definition I like to highlight as much as I can, because I think we get confused by this so often when it comes to righteousness. And that we're supposed to pursue righteousness. And yet so often when we hear righteousness, we go, that's not what I want to do. And yet the Bible always says, like, go after righteousness. Because sometimes what we do is we connect righteousness, or that word righteousness, or I think the wider culture does, to a self-righteousness. And that's not particularly good, because that means you are just trying to figure out how you are better than me, right? And before your God or whatever. And yet, like, I don't experience righteousness as necessarily anything good from you. It's just good. It's good for you. It's not good from you. Righteousness, as Bruce Waltke, who has written on the book of Proverbs. I think he quotes perhaps another author who came up with it. But he says, if you look in Proverbs in particular, righteousness is defined very, very simply that righteousness is about being willing to undermine your own interests for the sake of the larger community. In other words, I'm thinking about living with a sense of integrity on all levels. There's a wholeness, and I'm going to hold those together. And guess what? If it means that I might have to kind of forego some of my interests for the sake of the community flourishing around me, yeah, I'll do it. Absolutely, because that's what integrity looks like. And so then in Proverbs, it's chapter 11, we see that what happens when the righteous flourish? A city rejoices. What? It's a challenge for us today as we think about being Christians in America. Do cities rejoice when churches prosper? Well, they should, if we're following the righteousness that God talks about. On the other hand, the wicked, what are the wicked? The wicked are those who, they're not necessarily, again, they're not like real evil looking with green faces, right? They're not, they don't look particularly evil, for instance. But the wicked are those who will always advantage themselves at the sake of everybody else when they give it opportunity. Think on a daily basis what that looks like. It gets really simple. You're willing to, if given a choice, you will always advantage yourself, or you kind of your gut levels, you flinch. I'm going to advantage myself and what I need in the immediate and the right now and the material at the sake of everybody else. Now, I'll say I'm really good. I'll say I really love everybody. I'm a good person. And of course you are, until it means that you have to disadvantage yourself. I'm not going to do that. We say he then becomes full of anger and resentment, and that's where you start to, and the author in 1 John talks about like he's there's death in that. And even if before there's an actual death, there is this resentment and anger that is stewing in him that Jesus hits out with his Sermon on the Mount. And he says, he backs up, he goes, everybody knows you shouldn't kill people. Like everybody knows that's a bad thing to do. And I want to back that up a little bit, because you think just because you're not killing people that somehow like I should go, yeah, you got it. That's God's ultimate will for you. Because you're full of anger. You're full of resentment. I think the way the metaphor he uses, he says, you're dancing in the fires of hell. Do you realize that? Back away from that. With how you are treating each other and with what you're holding on against your brother or your sister. It's fascinating to see that kind of the impunity that he's done anything wrong. There's a sense of like, I'm totally sinless and I'm totally a victim. Doesn't recognize, in fact, he's offended that the world and God doesn't recognize his authentic goodness and his love. One of the things that sometimes we see within our culture is this victim mentality. Maybe we even feel about it, especially when things seem to be going different, or it feels like we become more and more uncomfortable, that we start feeling like we're the victims of the world around us. A victim mentality is antithetical to the gospel. I say that again. A victim mentality is antithetical to the gospel that Paul talks about all the time. You've overcome the world. Be confident. You've overcome the world. And what's interesting is that Paul never prays for people to get out of the rough stuff that they're in. This is a challenge for me. A lot of times I wish God would get me into better situations, in a better environment, where I feel like I can flourish more and I'm not under pressure. The problem is that Paul never does that. He never once prays for that. He always prays that we would be strengthened, that we would overcome. And by the way, let's just remember, we always overcome, right? So that there's never a victim mentality. And if anything, if there's any kind of sense of harm been done to us, what we talk about is like, brutal things have been done to me, I've experienced evil, but guess what? God was better than that. And so we give a testimony that Jesus actually is better than any other form of spirituality. Not because other people are stupid or bad, but because what we've experienced is that we've seen life anew out of places of absolute death. Maybe for you guys to think about within your groups is to think about that this is within the context of worship and religious practice. We, at this church, one of the reasons I came back here is I was excited about a church that wanted to embrace the idea of engaging the generations. I wouldn't have come back if that wouldn't have been the case. There is a tremendous gift in that, and there's tremendous power in that. And I believe that in many ways that's sort of the answer that we have been longing for as a church in America, is that we have to start figuring out how to connect the generations that have gotten isolated again and again. It's really good, and God calls us to it. Here's what I also know: it's brutal, and it's uncomfortable, and there are very good reasons why we don't as a culture. And why? Because we have to put up with each other, and it's uncomfortable. And we get people push on our particular styles of how we like worship, and people push on our particular ways that we like to do our ministries or our programs, and it's uncomfortable. What does it mean for us then to say we have to understand some of this authentic love that that John is pushing out, if we're to have a sense of confidence we're going the right way? Otherwise, we end up getting in this competition all the time. And so I only bring that up just to make us aware. This is the challenge for us, and this is why sometimes it can be so hard for us to connect generations, even though I have countless experiences of people that are dying for it on both sides. We tried an experiment with, you guys are doing this here, like, you know that it's rich. I've seen it be really rich, but we have to be aware that it's difficult at times, and it can take sacrifice. Well, I won't take much time because you know this. But think about then what happens with a different son in the person of Jesus. That what we see is that what he does on the cross essentially is an integrative work that pulls us back into what it means to be authentically human. And I think in some ways, some version of that language is how we can engage with a wider culture that doesn't care particularly about being religious, and probably doesn't even believe that there's an afterlife. It doesn't really care. Whether they should or not is irrelevant, right? Doesn't really matter. It's the fact that they don't care. In fact, we might even be wondering, like, it's hard to know, like, especially when we get focused so much on the here and now, which in many ways is good. Like, how do we know about what's going down the road? We could talk, though, about being authentically human in a way that integrates these parts of ourselves instead of feeling like we're fragmented. Because we will pursue transcendent and spiritual meaning in all kinds of ways. It doesn't mean that that has kind of an integrative power in our lives. You see, what Jesus does, though, is he begins to see a sacrificial love that connects the spiritual love with the material. That you see that it's actually worked out. How do I know that Jesus loves me, even if I don't necessarily think it or feel it? Well, because he demonstrated it. I mean, we think about that. That's one of the worst challenges for us as a church is the accusation of hypocrisy. And that's been true since the very beginning. We want to know, is this real? And on the other side, what do you see? You see him integrating the transcendent and the immediate. In the immediate moment, Jesus is willing to trust in his heavenly Father, and therefore to be obedient, even though it cost him. And I love that we are reminded that Jesus is in the garden, and he's asking his Father, like, really, really, really? Are you sure? Really? Just want to work this out, really? Because obedience usually is costly. And we shouldn't be cavalier. And we shouldn't be cavalier with it in our own lives, or as we call people who are investigating Jesus to come closer to him. It's going to mean that they're going to make probably some decisions as they go closer and closer, which this is us our whole lives, and they will be costly. We can't be cavalier about that. We should be sweating bullets over that. Because the immediate matters. And we know that because Jesus came in the flesh from the Father to integrate life. Well, lastly, and then I'll leave this with you. I think John, or the author of John, ends this way. He says, this is how we know, we can be confident that we belong to the truth, and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. Two things. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts, and that he knows everything. That some of us can live, and we probably vacillate back and forth between these two, but some of us can live with a real sense of condemnation. That my heart condemns us, and that I'm not forgiven, that I'm not loved. That if God really, really knew, me and know what's been done to me and know what I've done, he wouldn't love me, and he would perhaps abandon me. I think the heart of the gospel is that we get mercy, every single one of us. I long for us to be communities of mercy. And I want to push on that more than grace, because mercy is a clear acknowledgement that it's a criminal who has just been convicted of mass murder standing in front of a judge. Do you then say, hey, judge, you should give me another chance? Yeah, I know I'm convicted, but you should just, give me another chance. No, when you're coming and you're crying for mercy before a judge, it's like, I am hooped, I deserve absolute death and punishment, and there is nothing I can say that has leverage on anybody else. That's mercy. Mercy is like in the Psalms, you talk about being in a miry pit. You're stuck in a miry pit, you can't get out, it's just a slippery mess. And that mercy, though, is that God, for no reason, he has no reason, except for his own kindness, says, I'll get in that nasty pit and I'll lift you up and I'll put you on a solid ground. And I think grace then says, here's a future that you don't deserve. We need to be communities of mercy. And if we are, then we can have a confidence that Jesus never turns away those who cry out for mercy from him. He's always tender to those who come and say, help, have mercy on me. That his mercy has been proven on the cross. And so that if our hearts condemn us, that has nothing to do with the love that God has for us, and we can put that aside. And how do we know that? If we can receive and we can be grateful for the mercy, and we show mercy given. We can have confidence in that, because he knows there's nothing that's hidden. So I don't have to live secret and afraid. On the other hand, we read, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God and receive from him anything we ask. This is this last one, I just simply would say is, I think, a call for us to live or to stop living provisionally. Like we're always sort of waiting for the next sort of best thing. Like we know we haven't done anything bad. We love Jesus. We do the kind of the right things. We're doing our best to work it out. But sometimes what we can do is we can live provisionally, in a sense of like there always could be something that could come in, or we live like somehow that like we're being faithful. We love Jesus, and yet like we're paupers. We're not paupers. We're not abandoned. He has given us his Spirit, and as we follow his way, his definition of love, into the places that are right in front of us, like he promises us again and again. This is a challenge. This is a big challenge for me. Is that so often I go in and I want to work hard for Jesus, and yet I forget, or I live as if it's really up to me, and I'm hoping, I know he's with me kind of, but he has given us the power of the Spirit to walk into all kinds of places and to demonstrate his love that is better than any other option out there. Even if it's weird, it's profoundly good. And so my question for you guys, you said, is which story do you want to live? What story do you want to be a part of? And I hope you could dream a little bit. What would happen if we were led by this? Incredibly simple, frustratingly simple passage, but really think about it in the context of two stories. In the story of what could happen here, what we could experience, and the story of what others could experience as they engage with us. It does come down to love, as much as it pains me to say, as a guy who likes to get after things. It really does come down to us loving one another. So let me pray for you guys, and we'll get out of here. Lord, thank you for this morning and for your word to us. I thank you that your word has an amazing way of coming alive to us as we come before it looking for you. Lord, I pray that you would lead discussion times, and throughout our week you would lead us to have our eyes open to the ways that you want to call us in to participating with your love in the world. I pray that you would give us confidence. I pray that you would give us freedom from any voices of condemnation. I pray that you would expose the ways in which we play at love, in which we fall into these traps like Cain of religious practice and being dutiful and looking good, and yet so often what we're seeing and what we're experiencing and what we're projecting to others is anything but good. Spirit, we need your wisdom, and we ask for it, and we thank you that we have it. Open our eyes. Empower us for your call in your name. Amen.